Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wisdom Tradition podcast. This is Alex Sakin, and today we're going to be continuing with a series that's going to be investigating the contours of U.S. empire and the existence of a very secret black weapons, black research, black technology world that's within the heart of U.S. empire, and it's concealed behind this entity that we call the national security state. So we have a situation in which there is the outer public society that sees itself as a nation state and that engages with other nation states as their peers and we form treaties with. But then behind this outer structure is basically the capitalist machinery of a global economic empire. And that's involving our banks and corporations going around the world and basically dictating the terms of world economic development. And this system is undergirded by a global network of military bases. And so that's called the national security state. That's the sort of architect of that program. And what I'm arguing is that the national security state actually has this depth dimension to it. So outwardly, it interfaces with this capitalist system of empire, but inwardly, it moves into this very hard to track world of unauthorized black projects, black budget programs, covert activities, covert research, off the books technology, deep black programs. So that whole architecture is run independently and autonomously of the outer democratic governance state. And it also exists independently of this level of empire that exists on the horizontal dimension that's spreading through capitalism and banks and corporations. And it's independent of the outer military. They're not aware of it. This is a very deeply concealed entity. We know that it emerged immediately after World War II. This is something I'm going to be talking about in this video. And we know that its role is to coordinate and sort of oversee this secret empire of black projects of all types. In particular, it's involved with the effort to develop breakthrough technologies, breakthrough weapon systems, things like UFOs or UAPs as they're now called. So in my estimation, the three main goals of this technocratic entity is to, number one, develop technologies. Number two, keep those technologies secret. And number three, work to engineer the architecture of a world government in which these technologies can finally be brought out and protected because they're very powerful, but that means they could be used for very destructive purposes. So the part of the reason for the secrecy is to protect this hoard of secret technologies and to protect it and keep it secure until one day a global governance paradigm can be established. So that's where the information security and control elements come in. That's where the secrecy comes in, and that's where the compartmentalization comes in. And so we're going to be examining this whole structure in further detail today. We began introducing it in a previous video. And this whole series that I'm doing right now, where I'm summarizing and outlining these issues, is based on a long series of articles that I wrote on my Substack and that I did podcasts for. And these are on the topic of the secret history of the 20th century. And in that 11-part series, I tell the story of the rise of this technocratic superstate and the black projects programs that it's involved in. So what I plan to do in this episode is go over a number of clips from various thinkers who have influenced me over the years in terms of my thinking on this issue. And to start with, I have a clip from Stephen Greer and his recent appearance on the Sean Ryan's podcast. And he's going to be basically talking about the architecture of this secret black projects world and the type of technologies that they have within them and that they are concealing away from outer society. And this sets the stage for all these other things we're going to be talking about. So I just want to play this clip, and it's going to overview basically what's going on in terms of this black projects world that very few people know about, but that only is now today, finally, it looks like the door is being opened to reveal this structure. So we're going to be analyzing it here.
Ben Rich was the head of the Lockheed Skunk Works and acknowledged towards the end of his period there that they had technologies that could, quote, take ET home. He also stated there were no private conversations anywhere on the earth. True. Mm-hmm. No matter what your encryption is. And also he said that anything you imagine, we've already done at the Skunk Works. Now, there's the Skunk Works that would deal with a conventional jet, rocket, ramjet type classified aircraft, right? But then there's another division that is the deep black. I want to make a distinction between the black budget and highly classified, legally overseen projects. Here I'm talking about, there's a guy I'm working with now who literally oversees the black budget of the United States. He was never read in on the UFO or UAP issue. And when he tried to find out, he went out to the Lockheed Skunk Works, he was shown a bunch of these conventional propulsion systems. He was not shown the ones that are the man-made UFOs, that are the electrogravitics, the things that float, boom, 100,000 miles per hour. So I think that that's one of the problems, is that there's almost two parallel systems. And there's very little points of intersection between the two, what I call the constitutional government of the United States. I just call it USG, the U.S. government, legal. And then there's the illegal secret government projects, okay, the ISG. So there are compartmented operations at the Lockheed Skunk Works dealing very specifically with this area of technology, which has nothing to do with rockets, jets, conventional aerodynamics. And it has to deal with electrogravitics, which is the ability to create a very high voltage system that causes a electromagnetic field propulsion. So there's almost like an electromagnetic field bubble around an object. It can levitate, lift, and it can go, Mach 300 and never have a sonic boom and no heat on the outer section of it. These are very advanced technologies. Now, those began to be studied back long before I was born, and I turned 68 this week, so you can imagine how long we've had these things. So there's facilities out in the desert. If you go out to the Mojave Desert, there's a facility and an underground opening. So the really sensitive facilities are all in underground skiffs or DUMBs, deep underground military base facilities. And that whole area of California is like a beehive connected underneath with tunnels.
Okay.
I know where they are. I know people who've worked in them. And remember,
are those all Lockheed?
No, because those are actually built by Bechtel Corporation or HIT Construction. There are a few contractors who build these underground connectors. And for years, they used a nuclear-powered tunneling device that would go through bedrock and just glassify it. So you'd have a connecting tunnel between, say, Edwards Air Force Base and Nellis Range. And you never have to go above the surface. So I'm very familiar with these and where they're located, and I've debriefed a number of guys who've been on them. So it's all part of let's call it a coalition of operations that are corporate, contractor, and governmental, but governmental as in off the reservation of legal oversight and constitutional requirements.
All right, so there he's basically laying out this architecture that I'm talking about. It's an entirely secret and covert world of black projects. It is run independently from the state, and it leverages the institutions of capitalism, but it's not capitalists who control it. It is some hidden body of scientists and engineers and basically strategists and planners who together comprise what amounts to a think tank. Even though we can't see what it looks like today, it's hidden behind this wall of secrecy and compartmentalization. We have been able to see what it looked like in the early prototype form of it, and that was in Nazi Germany with this very secret program of their own called the Kammerstab, and it served these exact same functions. It was a central think tank dedicated to secret technology development, and it masked itself behind all kinds of security measures. It was located literally underground, its main operations and facilities. And it, utilized compartmentalization so that only a select few, a think tank, which is what this Kammerstab entity was, a core think tank of engineers and scientists, they could manage the whole architecture of this Black Projects program. So after World War II, this operational structure was harvested by the American intelligence agencies, very elite aspects of the American empire, and they recreated its structure here in America. And once they recreated this operational entity, they formed the basis of this technocratic superstate. So that it was formally born after World War II, although there seems to have been decades of advance work put into it. All right, now in the next series of clips, we're going to be looking at the era around World War II when this Kammerstab-style program was created in America, this secret black projects empire, which became the foundation of the technocratic superstate. This was all begun in the 1940s in a formal way. Now we could think back to the Manhattan Project as being maybe the first iteration of this. Now the difference was with the Commerstab program, they were investigating sort of exotic, quote unquote, paradigms of physics and science that the Manhattan Project wasn't. So Manhattan Project was ostensibly based around a relativistic model of weapons development, and the German program was premised on researches into the occult, researches into alchemy, and overall was dealing with this idea of the luminiferous ether. And that was the basis of their program. And so that's allowed them to start developing things like UFO or UAP technologies. It's something that the Nazis experimented with. I wrote about this in my article from a guy named Victor Schauberger, but looks like they had other programs as well. But it was all premised around their studies into the quote unquote exotic physics of etheric energy. And so that program is actually the foundation of the American program now. After World War II, that the sort of Manhattan Project atomic bomb program became sort of the outer aspect of, U.S. military technology, and the inner aspect became what the Americans harvested from the German program. So as it turns out, 1947 was a key year in setting up the formal structure of what would become this American technocratic superstate. And so we're going to hear from Catherine Austin Fitts, and she's going to be talking about what happened in 1947 that helped set the stage for a huge transformation within this whole governance structure of America by beginning the build out of a secret black projects world. And this would become the domain of this technocratic superstate.
What the 47 and 49 Act did as in combination was it allowed appropriations to claw money out of other agency budgets for the intelligence agencies on a non-transparent basis, which gives the U.S. government the ability to appropriate money and then shift that money out of the agency it's designated for and have it disappear into the black budget on a non-accountable basis. So you have, what you did with the 47 and 49 Act was you created an infrastructure that allowed money to be secretly channeled to secret and very, from a technology standpoint, unbelievably important, powerful projects on a non-transparent basis. So there's no accountability. And one of the things I'll tell you as a former government regulator is without transparency, the shenanigans that go on, it is very hard to manage big pots of money without some kind of feedback and redundant transparency to kind of keep everybody in check.
So what she's saying there is that basically the onset of a black budget program was implemented with this National Security Act of 1947 at the same time that it was installing formally all these organizations that would be responsible for performing all types of covert activity, from the National Security Agency to the CIA, and a number of other military and defense-related restructuring initiatives were taken on during the same period. The significant part is that now it's officially allowed for money to be reappropriated from the overt budgets of government agencies and to be funneled into these black projects. And so this covert funding mechanism is what we call the black budget. And so that's what we're going to be going into, because what happens is the black budget sets the stage for all kinds of nefarious activities to come in, because it's basically a realm where it's admissible to do fraud and, drug smuggling and money laundering and things like that, because those set up opportunities for black budget funds to be obtained. So black markets are set up, covertly by the CIA so they can be a source of money and funding for the black budget. And once money goes into the black budget, then it becomes dispersed out into all these black projects. Because it's not a officially mandated structure, it's really like a shadow realm. And because the technocratic superstate relies on secrecy, it has to find secret sources of funding, and that sets the stage for all this activity to take place. So it's sort of like, it's not necessarily that it's the desired thing for these black markets and black programs and stuff to be operated by the technocratic superstate, but it's sort of like a necessary evil in my as I understand it for them, because they have to build out this secret empire. They have to build out these technologies. They have to monopolize them, In their view, national security depends on it. So that means that they have to have the money. And so the black budget is how they obtain it. And all these nefarious operations that we'll be talking about in a moment go into feeding that black budget. So, the blights on modern civilization are really the consequences of this secrecy and compartmentalization, and the fact that our governance system can't be transparently revealed. It has to be hidden and be kept secret. And the technology basically dictates it. The power of the technology and the need to keep it secure and compartmentalized basically dictates this need for secrecy. And the secrecy sets the stage for the shadow. So in this next clip, Peter Dale Scott is going to have a couple quick comments on the problems about secrecy. And then I'm going to go back to Catherine Austin Fitts. And this next couple clips are from a conversation that she had with Joseph P. Farrell. And these are both figures that actually all three of these people are figures I cited in my articles.
And the balance between the public state and the deep state has been shifting more and more towards the deep state, because there are checks and balances on the public state, and nothing that works by way of checks and balances with the CIA and DIA and the Drug Enforcement Administration, the various components of the deep state. Because the real problem is secrecy. Where you have secrecy, you have no rational assessment from outside.
The United States literally opened up to the drug trade, and that money is literally used to lever the money in the black budget, and it's completely non-accountable. That's then laundered with mortgage securities and government securities fraud, which levers it to an even greater amount.
You're dealing with vast amounts of very criminal money, as you point out, being laundered through banks, through government securities, and so on and so forth. And this whole vast enterprise, in turn, looks to be supporting some sort of vast secret research project of some sort. So yeah, I'm in total agreement with you. This is exactly what I've been finding in my research. And the question it raises to my mind, Catherine, is what are they doing with all of this money? It's obvious how they're laundering it, mortgages and bonds and securities and derivatives and so on and so forth. But what are they using it for?
So just to recap real quick, these authors were talking about the existence of this black budget system and how it is involved with all kinds of nefarious activities in order to feed itself. And really the outer petrodollar empire, is set up in such a way that it really feeds the resources and wealth of the world into this black projects world, which is governed on a non-democratic and unaccountable basis. And in fact, we don't really even know what it looks like, other than certain basic ideas that I'm talking about in terms of this technocratic superstate entity. But the details of it are invisible because it is behind this massive wall of secrecy and compartmentalization and misdirection and information control and security. And so we can only piece together this situation, but the fact that it does exist is really uncontroversial. It's like Dr. Greer was talking about in the first clip. This is a structure where we have a lot of accounts of people who've worked in these programs and have been whistleblowers, so to speak, about its existence, and they've only glimpsed a piece of it. But the idea that there's these massive underground research bases, that there are super advanced technologies that are based on a totally different paradigm of science and physics, these things are all true. And so, as Catherine Fitts was exploring there and Dr. Farrell, these were all set up in the beginning of this Cold War era. So right after World War II, this whole situation was engineered into place. In the next clip, we're going to go a little bit beyond just looking at the black budget. That's one source of funding. But as we're going to hear next, in the same 1947 era, post-World War II era, beginning of the Cold War period, there was something else that emerged as well. And this is the off-the-books system of finance. And this goes to really, in my opinion, finance the build-out of the heart of this technocratic deep state entity and the most secret black projects being done. at the the very depths of this vertical dimension of U.S. empire, that these are financed by this completely off the books system of funding. And so the origin of this completely off the books system is what Dr. Farrell is going to talk about in this this upcoming lecture clip.
Everyone thinks about the Nazis going around Europe and plundering art treasures and stockpiling everything. Nobody remembers the Japanese. But in point of fact, throughout World War II, there was a Japanese operation called Operation Golden Lily. It was led by a member of the imperial household by the name of Prince Chichibu. So in other words, this is not even in the hands of the Kempeitai. It's not even in the hands of Japanese intelligence. This is directly an operation of the imperial house. And what they did is they went in. You think the Nazis set the level for efficiency of plunder? The Japanese went into Asia and China and Southeast Asia and literally suctioned every last scrap of any kind of precious metal, gold, silver, platinum, you name it, jewels, cash, artworks, ancient manuscripts, everything that they could lay their hands on to bring it back to Japan. This was called Operation Golden Lily. Now, this gentleman here, toward the end of the war, after the American invasion of the Philippine archipelago, learns about it. And his name is Captain, later General, Ed Lansdale. That name might be familiar to some of you JFK assassination researchers. Lansdale learned about Operation Gold Lily and all of this vast loot that was buried on Luzon and Mindanao and all over the Philippine Islands. And when he learned about it, he flew to Tokyo to debrief General MacArthur. And MacArthur said, well, that's interesting. I need you to get on a plane and fly to Washington and brief President Truman. We're talking again, folks, in 1945 dollars terms of billions of dollars. Billions. So Lansdale flies to Washington and briefs Truman. Now please note right at the bottom here, this is the beginning in 1947, not only of a black budget, but please understand me now, something completely separate and totally hidden. Truman, on learning of it, discusses it with his cabinet and, quote, decided to proceed with the recovery, but to keep it a state secret, unquote. Now, folks, at that moment, President Truman put the American intelligence apparatus in the banking business. At that moment. I leave it to you to work out all of the implications of that decision for what's going on right now, both domestically and internationally. Now, that bit of information, incidentally, if you don't know this work, it's a wonderful book discussing Operation Golden Lily called Gold Warriors. It's by Sterling and Peggy Seagrave. Now, there's another aspect to this story. This is what the Seagraves themselves state in Gold Warriors on page 3 a little later on. The treasure was combined with Axis loot recovered in Europe to create a worldwide covert political action fund to fight communism. This black gold gave the Truman administration access to virtually limitless unvouchered funds for covert operations. But I believe it goes beyond mere covert operations because, as I put it down here at the bottom of the slide, the sheer scale when you combine that Japanese loot and that Nazi loot, suggests to me that much more than communism or covert operations against it, or even post-war Nazis or whoever else, but that the UFO was a long-term problem. So let's look and sum it up. Truman's 1947 decision to keep all this Axis plunder a state secret implies truly profound and significant things for the long-term financial structure of the West. Number one, it implies the intelligence national security complex now entered the realm of international finance and banking directly. Number two, it implies that the intelligence community had to have, at a lower level of complicity, the participation of prime banks around the world to make such a system work. The fourth thing it implies is the creation of a vast secret mechanism of finance, totally unaccountable to the public and their institutions of government, and increasing the dominant financial concern of the American federal government.
All right, so there we see that the critical years after World War II set the stage for this secret system of finance to emerge. And it emerges right alongside this National Security Act, which allows all this black budget funding to be obtained through these covert means. All of this is now being put in place right after World War II, as I hope you can see. And all of this is done covertly. So in this next clip, Stephen Greer is going to talk about how this whole world now of black budget financing and black projects, that none of this is legal. So it amounts to a secret government that is essentially beyond the rule of law, because there's no transparency and accountability to what it's doing, and the need for secrecy and compartmentalization ensures that system. So here's a clip from Dr. Greer talking about the invisible government aspect of it and the extrajudicial aspect of it.
As Senator Inouye said, and I'm quoting, there's a secret government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own funding mechanism that's above the law and free from the law itself. You know, that's something that most people have to understand first off here, is that what we're dealing with is not a sanctioned or even a normal black project. And I can say this with authority because I am working now with people who literally manage the black budget of the United States currently. And they were denied access to all these projects. They had no idea that there were deep black pass-through projects. We'll get into this. How is this done? Structurally, organizationally. What's the architecture?
All right, in this next clip, we're going to hear from Catherine Austin Fitts, and she's going to move the timeline up from the 40s now into the 80s, specifically 1980. And this is when another chess piece was moved into position regarding this secret black projects world. And this is specifically when it became admissible for these private corporations and private contractors to become protected by this sort of umbrella of security protections that are put in place to support this black budget world. So we're understanding here that it's a hybrid public-private entity that we're talking about when we talk about the technocratic superstate and this black projects world and the use of covert projects to finance black budgets. All this is being run on a hybrid public-private context. And so she's going to talk about that here.
In 1980, when George H.W. Bush became vice president and assumed responsibility for the National Security Council and the Intelligence Agencies and Enforcement, they promulgated an executive order that allowed private corporations to handle highly classified secret projects. So now let's take those four things in combination. What have we done? We have created a financial mechanism that can borrow as much money as it wants globally and print as much money as it wants globally using citizens' credit and the federal credit, and give that money to private corporations for the most powerful secret projects on the planet in terms of technology, And they don't have to report to anybody, and it's completely secret and non-transparent. But you're basically creating a secret source of an infinite amount of government money to pay corporations to develop and own the most powerful weapons, technology, and space programs on the planet. And it is completely out of control and not under congressional supervision. So now not only have you created $1 trillion black budget, but now it can finance private corporations owning and controlling the most advanced technology in the world on a completely non-transparent, non-accountable basis.
This is precisely the same structure that I'm seeing, Catherine. This
Right.
nexus of people, high-level bureaucrats within intelligence, and the private corporate world with black budgets and secret research into technology.
So again, this entity that we're talking about is beyond the scope of the outer government. It's beyond capitalist institutions. It's completely unseen and therefore unaccountable. And in its wake, it leaves space for all kinds of shadow activities that may not have to do with its central mission, but because it's created this umbrella of secrecy around itself, that creates the environment where all types of nefarious activities can take place. So that situation really can't be fixed until you unwind the secrecy. And in my opinion, you can't unwind the secrecy until you have the goals that this technocratic superstate be achieved, that the goals that it's working for. And those are, world empire, moving into a global governance system, that's the installation of a world security grid, and also the sort of perfection of these energy technologies and whatever also is included in their arsenal, UFOs, anti-gravity stuff, the perfection of those technologies. So when those triple mandates are fulfilled, then I think that we can have a revelation of this actual governance system. And in the process of revealing that actual governance system that we do have, this whole world of shadow activities can be sort of excised and revealed and sort of cut out. So that's my opinion. Now I want to look at a couple clips that talk about the effect that this invisible government has had on the overt economy. And so what happens when you engineer the economy and the world system to not optimize itself or optimize human well-being, but instead optimize secrecy and the need to funnel, black budget payments into black projects. So when that's your priority, you create a permanent war economy because you need to surround the world with a imperial structure that will enforce this economic centralization system to take place with all this, graft being part of it. So what you end up having is an outer economy that becomes hollowed out, and that's what we have today. This vacuous economic and social system that's been completely harvested for this black budget, black projects world. And so first up, we have Peter Dale Scott, who's going to talk about the war economy. And then we have Catherine Austin Fitts, who's going to talk about the larger scale idea that when you look at the balance sheet of the world economy as a whole, you see the books don't add up. The money's being funneled out of the overt economy, but disappearing. And what it's disappearing into is this black projects world. So anyway, let's get into these.
The problem is, and this goes back to the dynamic of democracies becoming empires, we have created a great deal of new wealth in this country, and we have an increasing split between the richest and the poorest. All of these things, they wreck the public economy of the public state, so they are weakening the whole, the civil society that sustains the public state. The military-industrial complex now is essentially the economy of this country. This isn't a militarized economy that we now have.
So think of the financial system as something that runs on 3 tracks. The overt economy financial system, which you and I see every day, the black budget, and then this hidden finance. And what I'm going to describe to you today, it's very simple, is that hidden system in the black budget grew and grew and grew, and what happened in the bailout period is it simply overwhelmed the whole system. And we're watching an integration of those systems in what I refer to as the period from the early 90s to 2012 as the financial coup d'etat. And my theory is that we've literally seen a fundamental change of control on how the planetary governance systems as a result of the shifts in money and technology that happened during that period. So I'm going to be talking about it. Everybody here knows how a budget sheet works. If you look at the budget, the balance statement for any company or for you personally, financially, on one side of the balance sheet you have the assets, and on the other you have the liabilities and the equity. Okay, so I've just made a circular, I like doing things in circles. So if you follow the money, the reporters always say follow the money. If you follow the financial transactions, all assets and operations on planet Earth leave a financial footprint. You have transactions, you have funding, you have people who think they own certain things, on and on and on. And what we're watching on planet Earth, what we've been watching since 1947, is you see huge sections of the financial system and the sort of map of the financial money, and there's nothing on the other side of the balance sheet. There's like this big question mark. And do you ever feel like the official reality and reality are getting further and further and further apart until your head is like a bungee rope? You know, I walk around saying it just gets weirder. And part of it is that you have more and more money and more assets going into that thing and driving the whole ecosystem financially. You know, we're talking about money on the scale of a leveraged buyout of the planet, which is essentially what I think the financial coup d'etat. We're not talking about corruption. This is a system.
So that breakaway civilization that Catherine Austin-Fitts is talking about is what I term the technocratic superstate. And really, she's talking about how we can trace through the finances the existence of this entity. So we have, on one hand, Dr. Greer talking about all the whistleblowers and people he's worked with who've come out of this world and told him about it. And then we have Catherine Austin-Fitts over here describing the financing of it and how you can't make any sense of the overt economy and why it has behaved the way it has without referencing the idea that all this money is disappearing in what it looks like a black hole. And what that black hole is this a whole covert architecture of black projects. And she's saying how over time you can kind of put together a picture where it looks like the outer society, outer economy is being gradually harvested and its resources vacuumed into this black budget state. So it's being starved out. Now, in my opinion, that sets the stage for an eventual restructuring on a global level. Next, I want to look at some clips from Richard Dolan, and he's going to be talking about the idea that there is this secret infrastructure, that this black hole of money that Catherine Austin-Fitts was talking about, that this has been going into a variety of secret projects of the kind I've been talking about. So here we're going to hear his analysis of what these secret projects might entail.
I look at it now as we're in a fence. You know, we're in this little enclosed fence in our little worldview that we're all supposed to believe. But just beyond that fence, there is something else. There's an infrastructure beyond that fence of ours. It's unacknowledged, and I think it's quite vast. So I want to look into it. It's not just in the atmosphere. It's down here on the ground. It's, I think, below the ground, probably. And I think it exists beyond Earth's orbit. There's something very, very significant going on. Before I get into the really strange stuff here with you today, I'll just put out the obvious remark that there are multiple space programs operating in a clandestine manner. One gentleman who had a lot of knowledge of how a lot of this worked out and made a very salient point to me, which was that first of all, the money going into these research and development programs related to this subject was enormous. He didn't give me a figure. But he said, think about this, no matter how enormous it is, the amount of money for the security on this program exceeds it by a factor of 7 or 8 times. So I'm thinking, well, what does that mean? This is a little more than guys with guns. We're talking, although that's part of it, we're talking maybe the construction of underground infrastructure facilities, the cost of managing and controlling the media, the cost of controlling political operatives that are prominent in the system. I can imagine that there's a lot of expenses going into this to contain this. So that was his insight. So you need black budgets. And what that, of course, requires, what that means, is at least constitutionally, in terms of legality, in terms of what this country likes to tell ourselves what we're supposed to be. This is a complete overthrow of what the United States is supposed to be about. This is a fundamental moment where accountability must not be open. It must not be transparent. Rightly or wrongly, I think wrongly, these people decided that this topic is vastly too important to be able to entrust to the general public. It's too serious, it's too dark, it's too threatening from their point of view. So you create black budgets and you essentially create a coup d'etat. That's what it is. It's a silent coup that takes place. And it took place by degrees, but fundamentally it took place, I would say, in the 1940s. And it deepened and deepened and deepened. In any case, what happens with these classifications of the technologies is, let's say we're part of that group. We're the scientists. And we come up with our breakthroughs. We'll come up with, yes, money makers, better integrated circuits, lasers, fiber optics, and the rest. Those are nice ground floor investment opportunities for sure. But we may come up with something a little bit niftier than that. We may come up with electrogravitics that actually work, something that can give you true gravity reduction. We may come up with a new form of energy, better than petroleum. Of course, we can't let the rest of the world know about that. That's off limits. We wouldn't be allowed to, because our bosses, the private interests that fund our operation, would say, no, can't do that. So what would we do? We would simply classify those technologies, and there are thousands upon thousands of classified patents along these lines in the U.S. And one of the gentlemen in this research field, Thomas Vallone, worked at the U.S. Patent Office for years, and he's spoken about this at length. Tom Vallone's one of the best experts on electrogravitics out there as well. So you've got a whole series of classified technologies that are off limits to us. And as I say, it holds our future hostage. So if you were smart enough to come up with your own version of electrogravitics and you wanted to patent it, I think you'd have a hard time getting that thing patented. You'd be running into some classified stuff. And incidentally, this is a key reason why there's now a movement. I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but not too much. But a key reason why there's this global rush right now to solidify a transnational legal structure. Not just NAFTA, not just the Transatlantic Free Trade Agreement with Europe, and not just with the TPPA, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. The whole thing's coming into place right now. And one of the key things that they feel that they must do is nail down intellectual property rights.
So I like what he was saying here about the mortgaging of our future to keep this program alive, the secrecy alive. And I think that if I had to guess, the people within the national security state would think that they had to keep this secret. It was so powerful, the technology and the paradigm that it suggested was so transformative that it would overthrow the whole world order. So rather than have that just come out all at once, there was a plan to implement and engineer a world order that could be made amenable to the release of these technologies. But as a consequence of that secrecy and compartmentalization, we have this entire drama of corruption and the bottoming out of world society taking place.
And if you go back into the 50s and 60s and you talk to or read the people who got the eyewitness reports of people who had engineered this system bottom up, because this has been going on for many, many decades, what they all tell you is it was the best of a lot of bad options. We, the intelligence agencies, got in the organized crime business and grew the organized crime business because we had to have the money, we had to have it on a secret basis, we had to control.
So that's kind of how I see the current situation that we're in globally and in America. And I feel like we are making a move towards a transition point in this move from nation states to global government. I feel like that's what the Great Reset indicates, and the CBDC stuff, and the whole lockdowns, coronavirus lockstep situation that happened. Also the Ukraine war has served to restructure geopolitical relationships worldwide. All these things are now happening on a global scale, and all the pieces are being maneuvered at once. And so it seems like the stage is being set for a big transition in governance. And I'm thinking it's a move towards global governance, because now the controlled release of information about these black projects and UFO programs and stuff like that we're seeing, now that this becomes more admissible, and the media is talking about UFOs, when you pull on this thread, you inevitably find this technocratic superstate. And this seems like it's a revelation of its existence. And I also think that this idea of an alien tie-in to these technologies and such, I think that exists as a meme or a psyop that's been implemented upon society as part of the control grid, as part of the information control grid around this technocratic superstate, and what the real science that it has discovered is, and what the real worldview that science suggests. And so we have like two nested psyops. We have the Cold War, and then we have the UFO. The UFO isn't a psyop, but it's used as part of a psyop, because the UFO technology is real, but it's used to sell this idea of aliens. And so that's what I'm going to be looking at in this next video that's going to follow this one. We're going to look at the architecture of the UFO psyop, so to speak, or as I call it, a worldview perception management campaign. It's meant to sort of lock different groups for strategic reasons on a certain level of understanding about what the whole picture looks like. So the alien idea really blocks people's thinking about the true structure of what exists. So I think that this alien meme is one of the things that we have to get beyond to get to the truth. And before we can have a coherent global government, we have to move beyond this idea of aliens. So that's what we're going to be talking about in the next video after this one. So until then, this is Alex Sakin. This is the Wisdom Tradition podcast once again. And thanks for watching.